Good morning. I'm sorry, I don't know good morning in Catalan, do you?
No, I don't. Good morning.
This, bon dia.
Bon dia.
That's it. Bon dia. This is Giorno, a man who lives the language. He is poetry. He lives poetry. He performs poetry, and he makes poetry possible. He's the denial. If anybody might think among you that poetry is a solo thing, Giorno has been denying that over the past decades.
Poetry arises as words and then goes to a page. So the printed word is ultimately absolutely important. I mean, I have the way when you're a poet, I think when you're a poet, this is how a poem arises in your mind. You hear something in your mind, and it's almost the first millisecond, it's a sound rather than a word. And that sound then becomes what is sort of wisdom, if you're lucky. I mean, if you're able to work with your mind properly, it becomes wisdom. And that wisdom transforms itself into a word. So from nothing, the sound becomes a word, and then if you're a poet, you write it down on a computer by hand or whatever. And then it becomes what you work with that, and it becomes a poem. So when it gets on the page as a word, that's the beginning. And then traditionally, the next step is a book, which is wonderful. Books are very important. It's like the natural extension. But what I did sort of in the early 60s, apropos of where I was in the early... I was born in New York City and went to school there, went to Columbia, and by chance I met a lot of artists in 1959 and 60. And they were a lot of what turned out to be great, famous people. I mean, but they weren't famous when I met them, like Andy Warhol and Bob Rauschenberg and Jasper and the pop artists and Merce Cunningham and John Cage. But they were just kids, older than me. You know, they were in their late 20s, and I was in my early 20s. And they were, the reason I'm saying this, that was the great influence of my life. Because you just being with them every day, you saw what they did. They got an idea, they were not afraid of it, they did it. And if it worked, they followed it. If they thought something wrong, they went in a different direction. So for the 60, 61, 2, 3, 4, this was this inspiration. I would say, if they can do it for painting and sculpture and music and dance, why can't I do the same thing for poetry? And just do it, right? Because in New York City at the time, well, anyway, so that gave rise to the idea that the book was wonderful, but there were countless ways to connect to an audience. So I did anything that occurred to me. As a poet, for poetry, for poets, there are no rules. You know, you don't have to do anything. If you want to read it on a page, if you want to perform that way, you do it. If you want to do something. So the great thing about poetry is that there's no rules. The things that the academic teach you in school, that there's only this way, the great traditions, it's great to learn all those things, and it's great to do them if you want to do them, but you don't have to. So what I've done, I've just evolved it over the years since I perform a lot. In my mind, the main venue for my poems is performance. I mean, I have a special connection to saying these words because I'm a Buddhist, a Tibetan Buddhist, and I've been doing meditation practice for 45 years. And so I approach it with disciplining the mind. But that's not necessary. I mean, a great poet, anybody, I mean, use even the most T.S. Eliot or Auden or Allen Ginsberg or if it's a great poem, it has arisen as wisdom from emptiness, and that's why it's a great poem, no matter who the poet is, whether they like it or not. I started taking LSD in 1964, and LSD is a great drug. And when you have a good trip, it's wonderful. But when you have a bad trip, it's terrible. And you realize that the bad trip is not caused by the drug, it's caused by your mind. So in like 1965, when I sort of was having a bad trip for whatever, an interpersonal relationship or what it usually is, a way to solve it, because it's a very strong drug, is that I sort of sat in trying to deal with the pain of my mind, you know? Sit in meditation. I had no meditation instruction, so I didn't know how to do it. But so you see from like Life magazine or any book, a statue of the Buddha sits like this and his eyes are closed or half open. So you do that. You just sit like that. and rest the mind naturally. And suddenly it has a profound effect on you. That suddenly all of the problems go away.
But now, finally, after years, we have this book, Subduing Demons in America, beautiful title. Selected poems 1962-2007, your poetry. It's available here in the bookshop, in the excellent bookshop at the CCCB. And so finally you took the time and the effort to collect the best of your poetry and put them in a book.
Yeah, well, I actually didn't do it. This book just came out 5 days ago. On Wednesday, last Wednesday, I saw the copy for the first time, and they gave a party in New York at this new museum. And it wasn't my idea. I could never dream of that. I've written thousands of poems, and every year I changed. Every year you see what you did, and you presumably do it better, or you get rid of what you're doing. And my editor, Marcus Spoon, got the idea, and I reluctantly said yes, because it's a vast work, and it took 2 years, and he Xeroxed everything and went through everything, and some of the poems of the 70s that were made for performance. You were given 40 minutes to perform, so instead of doing 100 little 1-minute poems, I would do these 20-minute pieces, 2 or 3 20-minute pieces, and that on a page becomes 60 pages. And somehow that year was different than the year before. So Marcus had to figure out which 12 or 15 pages in that poem he could take out that represented that. So he did that. And I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
Because it must be